Hi, my name is Nobody. At least, that's who I became the night my own wife pointed at me, laughed, and told a room full of powerful people I was just the waiter. They clapped. They laughed. I stood there, holding a tray like I belonged beneath them. But then, her boss stood up, spoke one sentence, and suddenly, the glass slipped from her hand. She thought she could humiliate me quietly. She didn't know who I was. But now, everyone does. Want to know what he said? I am the youngest son. Not just by age, by role, by unspoken assignment. There's a quiet weight to being the one who always steps aside, not because anyone asks, but because they expect you to know your place without needing to be told. Growing up, I learned to read the room better than I read books. I knew when to give up my seat at the table, even before someone asked. I knew when to cut short a sentence mid-thought because someone more important had something to say. And I remember being told more than once, "You're easy. You don't need much. Let's focus on your brother's thing right now." I used to smile and nod. It made things easier, and easier was the currency in our house. No one ignored me cruelly. It wasn't like that. I wasn't shoved into corners or left behind. Instead, I was quietly filtered out, like background noise in a house too busy to notice what was humming beneath it. There was this internal rule that ran deeper than any spoken one. Don't make things uncomfortable. So I didn't. I didn't when Dad forgot I played piano and bragged about my brother's football instead. I didn't when Mom introduced me at church as our calm one, the one who never gives us trouble. And I certainly didn't when birthdays came around, and the candles on my cake were an afterthought. Silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. When I got older and met Naomi, I thought maybe things would change. She was sharp, ambitious in a way that filled every room she walked into. She said she liked how I listened, that I didn't interrupt like most men did. She called it grounding. At first, I believed her. When we got married, I thought, finally, someone had chosen me, not for being loud or bold, but for being steady. But over time, I began to notice she liked that I didn't argue, that I didn't ask for more. When she made plans and forgot to include me, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, you don't mind, right? You're easy." And I'd nod, because wasn't that the role I knew best? Tonight, I'm wearing a tuxedo I didn't buy, attending a gala I didn't help plan, surrounded by people who don't know me, and likely won't remember me. It's Naomi's world, her clients, her stage. I'm just a silhouette beside her, tailored, shaved, quiet. We arrived at the downtown venue just before sunset. The fall chill in Chicago lingered in the air, crisp but not biting. The event planners buzzed around like bees, perfecting lighting, sound, floral arrangements. Naomi was already in hostess mode, her heels clicking across the marble floor like punctuation marks. She gave last-minute instructions while I lingered back, adjusting the sleeves of my borrowed tux. At one point, someone handed me a tray of champagne flutes. "Just hold this for a sec, please," they said. I held it. Didn't ask why, didn't even look for Naomi's reaction. I've learned that helping, even without being asked, keeps things smooth. It was then I noticed the first echo. A folded napkin in my hand, from the tray. Green, embossed with gold, her company's logo shining under chandelier light. I didn't mean to take it, but I kept it anyway. It's just one night, I reminded myself, stepping aside as guests began to trickle in. I told myself not to make this about me. She worked hard. She deserved this. I didn't need an introduction, didn't need applause. Just stay quiet, stay in place, stay useful. She came back to my side, finally, as a cluster of executives approached. Her hand found my forearm. Firm grip, not gentle. Her voice lowered, not unkind, but managerial. Just stay close. Let me handle this. Her nails pressed into my sleeve just a bit too tightly, as if to remind me I was on display, not as a partner, but as a prop, and I nodded, because I didn't know, not yet, that this was the moment I agreed to disappear. I thought disappearing would protect us. I was wrong. I stood beside her as more guests arrived, the soft clink of heels on marble echoing through the lobby. The lighting had dimmed slightly, casting a golden haze over polished surfaces and crystal glassware. Naomi stood straight, composed, a soft smile stretched across her lips, not for me, but for the people coming toward her. The space between us wasn't cold. It was measured, practiced, intentional. We weren't fighting. We didn't fight. We just functioned like two professionals on a project with clearly defined roles. She greeted a couple with a warm hug and introduced herself. She didn't turn to me, not even a glance. I smiled anyway, just in case they looked my way. Just in case I needed to signal, it's okay, I'm good here. That's how it was with us. She spoke for both of us. I nodded. She carried the conversation, chose the restaurant, booked the flights, answered questions about our plans, corrected people when they said my name wrong, sometimes before I could even open my mouth. I used to think it was love. Now I know it was just habit. Naomi wasn't cruel. That needs to be clear. She was efficient. She didn't call me names or raise her voice, but the quiet between us wasn't peace. It was calculation. She managed things, and in the space she left, I shrank. Somewhere between the coat check and the champagne station, I found myself holding a guest's clutch while they fixed their heel strap. They didn't ask. They just turned and handed it to me. I took it. Didn't even blink. That's what I did. Hold coats, move chairs, stand by during introductions. People assumed I worked there, or was part of the catering staff, or maybe some intern helping out. I never corrected them. I didn't want to embarrass anyone. Or myself. I caught my reflection in one of the lobby mirrors. The tuxedo looked clean, but the sleeves were a little short. The jacket hung oddly at the shoulders. It wasn't mine. It was borrowed from her cousin's husband. He's a manager at some consulting firm. Bigger build, talks loud. I pulled the jacket straight and smoothed my tie. I whispered to myself, it's not my night. Another server passed with a tray. Someone waved them over, and in the shuffle, I somehow ended up holding an empty glass. No one noticed. No one said thank you. It was just expected. Again, I didn't correct it. There's something about being mistaken for help that sinks deeper when it's in front of someone who knows better. Naomi saw it. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. Instead, she turned slightly, angled her body so mine was half blocked from the small circle of guests she was addressing. She smiled and leaned in, laughing at something. When someone looked toward me, she shifted again, subtly but deliberately, pulling the attention back to herself. She wasn't being cruel. She was being calculated. And that hurt more than anything she could have said. I could have stepped forward. I could have said, "Hi, I'm her husband." But I didn't. She's under pressure, I told myself. This is her world. She's building something tonight. Don't ruin it. It wasn't the first time I swallowed myself to keep the peace. It started in childhood, didn't it? Don't make things awkward. Don't embarrass us. Be good, be quiet. So I stayed quiet. I watched as Naomi charmed her way through another group, the way her laugh landed right on cue, how she remembered details about people's kids or their vacations or which schools they were targeting for their daughters. No one remembered mine. We don't have any. Another tray passed by, this time with desserts. Small, intricate things I couldn't name. I caught the scent of vanilla and something citrus. My stomach tightened, not from hunger, but from something else. Something was coming. I didn't know what exactly, but I could feel it building. People were gathering more tightly now. The music changed, subtle but intentional, shifting from soft jazz to a deeper instrumental with more rhythm. A few executives began to walk toward the center of the reception area, signaling something official was about to happen. Naomi's posture shifted. She stood taller, adjusted her neckline, smoothed her skirt. She looked over at me for the first time in nearly half an hour. And then she smiled. Not the warm kind, not even the polite kind, the kind that warned me I was about to become someone else. That smile came right before she erased my name. The doors to the main ballroom opened with a soft sweep, and I followed Naomi inside. Warm amber light spilled from the high chandeliers, casting a gold sheen over the sea of suits, silk dresses, and polished wine glasses. Jazz drifted lightly through the air, smooth, unobtrusive, classy. The kind that makes you think you should already know the tune. But I didn't feel part of the music or the room. I felt like background noise, faint and fading. Naomi glided forward like she belonged there. She always moved like that in her spaces. Confident, sure, magnetic. I walked a step behind, not because she told me to, but because I'd trained myself that way, from years of falling back, of giving space, of not getting in the way. We paused near a small knot of executives, already deep in conversation. Naomi placed a hand lightly on my elbow, like a gentle traffic sign, before turning to the group. "Hi," she said warmly. "I'm Naomi Keller, managing partner at Eastline." Smiles and nods all around. She didn't hesitate. Her voice rang clear, practiced. Then she turned slightly, gestured toward me, and added, "This is he's with me tonight." Just that. No name, no husband, no anything. They gave me polite half-smiles, the kind people give when they don't quite know if they should shake your hand or keep holding their cocktail. I gave them the same smile back. I'd perfected it, the kind that says, "Don't worry, I'm not here to take up space." It should have stung. It did. But it didn't surprise me. I drifted a few feet back as Naomi sank into their conversation, talk of mergers, firm growth, fiscal projections. Nothing I couldn't follow. I work in operations. But I wasn't here to speak. I was here to not interrupt. And as I stood there, one hand gripping the folded napkin I hadn't realized I still had, a memory rose up, sharp and sudden. We were at my cousin Emily's graduation party. I must have been 9. There was a photographer, one of those guys with the huge flash and a booming voice. "Let's get the kids together," someone shouted. I remember running up, eager in the front row, but then Mom's hand was on my shoulder. "Let your brother stand there," she whispered. "He's the oldest." I stepped aside, not because I wanted to, because I'd learned it kept things easier. "Just one of the boys now," the photographer joked as my brother took my spot. I smiled then too. The same one I gave these executives tonight. Back in the ballroom, I found a small table by the wall where a program was neatly placed next to a votive candle. I picked it up. Opening night sponsors, event schedule, list of speakers, Naomi Keller, Eastline Partners, James Peterson, Rosewood Legal, Anna Lee, Beacon Equity. No mention of me, not even a +1. I flipped to the seating chart. Our table was labeled East Line Leadership. She was listed. I wasn't. Not forgotten, just omitted. Like a detail someone decided wasn't essential. I held the paper loosely, then folded it in half and slipped it into my jacket pocket. It didn't really matter, but it did. I looked around the room, wondering if anyone else noticed. No one did. Or if they did, they assumed I was here to assist, not belong. A woman in a red dress leaned toward me. "Excuse me," she said, nodding toward the bar. "Do you know if the Chardonnay is dry?" I opened my mouth, then paused. "I'm not sure," I said quietly. "Sorry." She smiled, embarrassed. "Oh, I thought you were helping with the event." I shook my head once, politely. "No worries." Minutes later, someone else passed me a used glass on their way toward the dance floor. I took it automatically. My own hands, trained reflexes, had decided for me. I looked toward Naomi. She was laughing now, bright and full. Her eyes sparkled, her shoulders relaxed. This was her rhythm, her spotlight, and I was an extra standing near the stage. I felt the urge rise when to step up beside her, put my hand gently on her back and say, "Hi, I'm her husband. My name's Mark." But I didn't. Not because I was scared, because I was trained. Don't embarrass her. Don't make things awkward. Don't make it about you. The same phrases that had carved themselves into me when I was a kid. When Dad forgot to introduce me to his old army buddy. When Mom thanked my brother for helping with the groceries I'd carried in. When teachers asked me to wait because we'll let someone else try answering first. A server walked by again. Napkins, champagne, shrimp skewers. I didn't take anything. I already felt full of things I hadn't said. The lights dimmed slightly as the MC took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our opening remarks in just a few minutes. Please take your seats." Naomi looked over her shoulder and made eye contact with me. Not long, just enough to signal, "Go find your chair." I moved toward the table. She walked slightly ahead. When we reached it, she took the seat at the center, one with her name tented in front. The seat beside her was blank. Mine, but not labeled. I sat down quietly, brushing a crumb from the tablecloth. Then I felt it. The shift. The hum in the air. The signal. The host approached from the right side of the ballroom. Staff adjusted the mic stand. Glasses clinked lightly. The jazz faded into silence, and Naomi stepped slightly in front of me, just enough to block me from view. By the time she spoke again, the room already knew what role I'd been given. I could feel the shift in the air before she even reached the microphone. I'd walked toward the center of the ballroom, the soft hum of conversation folding into anticipation as the formal program got underway. Naomi's heels clicked into place in front of a simple podium set under brighter lights than the rest of the room. The jazz that had floated through the reception faded into quiet murmurs. Someone adjusted the microphones. A hush fell over the crowd. She stood straight, poised, elegant, radiant, and, as always, in command. I stood behind her shoulder, my posture neutral, my expression calm. This wasn't a moment for theatrics. I'd learned long ago that appearances matter, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. She stepped up to the mic, thanked the sponsors and the organizing team, acknowledged the achievements of everyone in the room. Her voice was warm and sincere, the kind of delivery that made people lean in and smile. I listened to the cadence of her words, the carefully chosen phrases she used to connect with each table, each small group of colleagues and clients. I felt as though I was watching her in a film, detached but observing every gesture. And then she turned toward me. She didn't look at me, not really, but she gestured slightly in my direction. "Tonight, we have a few people helping out," she said, with a gentle lift in her tone. "This is one of the assistants making sure everything runs smoothly." The words landed like cold water poured over warm linen. Not my husband, not my partner, not Mark Keller, just one of the assistants. I stood there, shoulders straight, eyes forward. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. Years of conditioning had drilled into me the value of stillness, the idea that sometimes silence preserves dignity better than any words you might use. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Not cruel, exactly. More like the laughter that bubbles up when people misunderstand something and feel they've just caught a joke. I heard it before I felt it. The giggles, the quick chuckles, the abrupt little exhalations of amusement. They weren't directed at anything outrageous, just the unexpected phrase, the break from the expected script. Someone glanced at her, then at me, and back again with that same quick grin that says, "Did you catch that?" There was no malice in it. That's what made it sting more, because no one meant harm. They were just enjoying the moment. And I was part of the backdrop. My body locked. It wasn't a reaction I chose. It was that old instinct from childhood. Stay still, don't escalate, don't make this worse. My mind went quiet for a moment, like a room with the lights turned off. I felt nothing and everything all at once. It was as if my thoughts were submerged, but all my senses remained awake. Someone nearby instinctively handed me a glass, white wine, cool to the touch, as though I was staff helping at the event. I took it, reflexively, before I could stop the action. The glass was heavier than I expected. I could feel the weight of it in my hand, and somehow it felt symbolic, like everything I had carried this evening, all those unspoken roles and silent sacrifices, had suddenly landed in my palm. I raised it only an inch before catching a reflection of myself in a mirror behind the bar. I didn't look like the man Naomi had just introduced to the room. I looked like a stranger assigned to a role I hadn't auditioned for. She chose this. That was my internal thought. Not anger, just clarity. She chose the words she spoke. She chose the phrasing. She chose how the room would hear it. It was deliberate, even if she wouldn't call it that. The applause started again, gentle at first, then growing louder as the audience shifted their attention back to the evening schedule. People clinked glasses, leaned into conversations, laughed politely, all while the moment settled into their minds like another piece of fine decor. No one checked on me. No one asked if I was all right. No one offered a smile that said, "Hey, don't mind that." There I was, standing in the center of a crowd full of faces I didn't know, yet all of them seemed to understand me better than Naomi's scripted introduction had. They saw a man with a glass standing slightly out of place, and they interpreted that in their own social shorthand. They assigned a role, and I fit right into their conclusion. That was the power of casual perception. How a few words spoken in front of an expectant audience could reshape the way people saw you in an instant. I remained where I was. The room continued on, as though nothing had happened, as though the world moved without regard for the humbling moment that had just unfolded. This was the ballroom, the formal program, the night's event. Everything had its place, and everyone their expected behavior. And my place, it seemed, was to observe. That was when I realized silence was no longer protecting anyone. I stayed still, right where I had been left standing. A man with no label, no role, no place. The applause went on, scattered but persistent. Glasses clinked, plates shifted. Conversations resumed like nothing had just happened. The moment I'd been introduced as just helping dissolved into the velvet fabric of the evening. But inside me, something stayed lodged, a weight pressing just under the ribs. The room felt miles away, though I was standing in the center of it. I watched everything through a kind of slow haze, like looking through a pane of frosted glass. Naomi had returned to her seat without so much as a glance in my direction. She was laughing, easily, skillfully, with the woman seated to her left, the man to her right. Her body language was open, relaxed, at home. She looked comfortable. I looked like I'd wandered in from the kitchen. I lowered the glass still in my hand and quietly set it down on a tray a passing server carried. The motion was small, invisible, but to me, it felt like drawing a line in the sand. My fingertips lingered on the rim a second too long before releasing. Not out of hesitation, but reverence almost, like I was letting go of more than a glass. This wasn't just about what she had said tonight. It was about every quiet nod I'd given when I wanted to speak. Every time I let someone else lead because it was easier than making a scene. Every dinner where my thoughts stayed in my mouth. Every introduction where I stood half a step behind. I had made myself small, and for a long time I believed that was strength, that letting others shine made me a better man, that being supportive meant disappearing just enough not to disrupt. But tonight proved that vanishing wasn't the same as peace. It was just silence, and silence had turned me invisible. I looked back toward her table. She was animated now, arms moving slightly, face lit with the glow she always reserved for work mode. Her laugh carried over the low music. She looked happy, and she never looked for me. That moment wasn't dramatic. No big realization, no swelling music. Just a quiet recognition settling in my bones. We weren't walking through life side by side. She was running ahead, and I'd been trailing behind, convincing myself that loyalty looked like obedience. Without saying a word, I turned and began walking away from the crowd. No one stopped me. No one noticed. My steps were steady, deliberate. Not rushed, not angry, just done. I passed by the bar, nodded politely to a waiter arranging empty glasses, and kept going until the edge of the ballroom gave way to a quieter hallway near the restrooms. I stood there a moment, letting the silence gather around me. No noise, no lights, just breath. I could have left. The thought sat at the edge of my mind like an open door. Get in the car, drive home, pretend this night didn't happen, make coffee, watch something stupid on TV, sleep. It would have been easy. I'd done it before, emotionally, if not physically. I'd walked away from things without ever leaving, let things slide, smiled through them. But the problem with slipping away is that, eventually, there's nowhere left to slip. I thought of a younger version of myself, maybe 12, maybe 14, at a family cookout. My older brother had been praised for something. I don't even remember what. I just remember standing in the corner, being told, "Don't be jealous, you're the easy one." Like being low maintenance was a prize. Like being overlooked was a virtue. And the worst part, I believed it. How many times did I teach people it was okay to forget me? How many times did I train them not to ask what I thought, or needed, or wanted? This night didn't start it. It only made it too loud to ignore. I moved toward the side entrance of the venue, close to the coat room. The door was propped open slightly to let in some air. Outside, the Chicago night had cooled further. the street light haloed with a faint mist. I took one step toward it, then stopped, not out of doubt, but because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't leaving out of fear. I wasn't withdrawing. I was deciding. And that's different. I didn't know what I'd say yet. I didn't know what the next move would be. I just knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wouldn't disappear again. Not to protect anyone. Not to make things smooth. Not to help someone else's story sound more polished. I turned my back on the open door. I didn't walk back into the ballroom. Not yet. I just stood there, between the silence and the noise, letting myself feel the line that had been drawn. I wasn't ready to fight, but I was done disappearing. That decision didn't go unnoticed. I felt it the moment I stepped farther down the corridor. The subtle shift in the air, the way conversations dipped and then resumed behind me. This silence wasn't the familiar kind I'd worn my whole life. It wasn't retreat. It was presence. Heavy. Unavoidable. The hallway behind the ballroom smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and warm linen. Staff moved with purpose, carrying trays, checking phones, murmuring into headsets. I stood near the side lounge, hands relaxed at my sides, posture steady. I wasn't hiding anymore, but I wasn't announcing myself either. A catering supervisor glanced at me and lifted her chin toward a nearby service cart. It was the same look I'd seen all night. Efficient, unquestioning. The old reflex stirred, muscle memory pulling me forward. This time, I didn't move. She waited a beat, eyebrows knitting slightly. I met her eyes and gave a small shake of my head. Nothing dramatic, just a calm refusal. "I'm not on staff," I said evenly. The words landed softly, but they landed. She blinked, processing. "Oh, sorry," she replied, already turning away, a touch flustered. That was all it took. Confusion rippled through the space. Someone paused mid-step. Another staffer glanced from me to the cart and back again. For a moment, no one quite knew where to place me. The machine stuttered. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't comply. I'd never realized how much smoothness depended on my silence. From the corner of my eye, I saw Naomi notice. Her expression didn't crack. It sharpened, not anger, calculation. She crossed the room with measured steps, heels clicking softly against the floor, her smile still in place for anyone watching. When she reached me, she leaned in, lowering her voice. "This isn't the time," she said, tone controlled. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The words were familiar. I'd heard versions of them before. At family gatherings, during long car rides, over dinners that ended in quiet. They always meant the same thing. Fall back in line. I looked at her. Really looked. The perfectly tailored dress, the composed face, the way her eyes flicked briefly toward the ballroom, checking who might be watching. "I won't do that anymore," I said. No edge, no apology, just truth. For a second, she stared at me like I'd spoken in a language she didn't expect. Then her jaw tightened. She straightened, stepped back, and turned away without another word. That's when things started moving. She pulled her phone from her clutch and walked a few steps off, speaking quietly, but urgently. I couldn't hear what she said, but I didn't need to. I knew that tone. I'd grown up around it. The sound of someone calling in reinforcement. I stayed where I was, not frozen, grounded. People passed by, glancing at me with curiosity now instead of assumption. Someone asked, "Are you with the event?" I answered calmly, "I'm a guest." The word felt strange in my mouth. And right. The music swelled again inside the ballroom. Applause broke out, louder this time. The program was shifting, building. I could feel it. The tightening coil of attention, the need for everything to look seamless. And I was no longer seamless. Naomi finished her call and slipped the phone away. She didn't look at me again. Instead, she headed back toward the stage area, shoulders squared, purpose renewed. I understood then. My refusal hadn't embarrassed her. It had challenged her control. Whatever she was about to do wouldn't be quiet. It wouldn't be private, and it wouldn't be kind. I took a slow breath, feeling my feet on the floor, the steadiness in my chest. The night hadn't reached its peak yet, not by a long shot. That was when she decided to remind everyone who she thought I was. She wasn't done humiliating me. She was just getting louder. I drifted back toward the edge of the ballroom, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I refused to disappear. The music softened, conversations lowered, and something unspoken passed through the room. People were paying attention now, not to me exactly, but to the tension that had crept into the evening like a hairline crack in glass. Naomi returned to the microphone as if nothing had happened. Her posture was flawless. Her smile returned on cue. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have thought this was just another polished gala, another confident executive guiding the night along. "There's been a bit of confusion," she said lightly, letting out a small, practiced laugh. "These events can be hectic, and sometimes roles get misunderstood." A few people chuckled. Heads nodded. She continued, voice smooth, reassuring. "My husband prefers to stay behind the scenes. He's always been that way. He's not really involved in the business side, but he likes to help when he can." I felt the words land, one by one, like stones placed carefully on my chest. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted me outright. She'd done something far more effective. She'd rewritten me. Around the room, I watched faces relax. The explanation made sense to them. It was clean, comfortable. It allowed everyone to stay at ease without questioning what they'd witnessed earlier. I stood there, hands loosely clasped, feeling my breath shorten. My mind raced through the options, all of them bad. If I stepped forward now, I'd look defensive, emotional, like a man lashing out because his pride was bruised. If I stayed quiet, her version would settle in as fact. By tomorrow, it would be the story people remembered. My body reacted before my thoughts could catch up. A tightness in my chest, a warmth creeping up my neck. I focused on the floor beneath my shoes, grounding myself the way I'd learned to do years ago when rooms felt too full and my voice felt too small. That's when I noticed the tray again. It sat a few feet away, untouched, abandoned near a service station. Earlier in the night, my hands would have reached for it without thinking. Now I let it stay where it was. The distance between us felt intentional, measured. As Naomi continued, adding small details that chipped away at me without ever naming me, I sensed a shift somewhere to my left. A movement in the VIP seating area. I glanced up briefly. One of the senior executives had stopped nodding. His expression had changed, not to anger, but to curiosity. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, studying the scene instead of accepting it. Another guest followed his gaze. Naomi didn't notice. She was in rhythm now, buoyed by the sound of her own authority. She pushed further, just a little. "He's very supportive," she added, "but some people just aren't built for the spotlight." That did it. The room grew quieter, not louder. The laughter didn't come this time. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. I realized then that this wasn't just about me anymore. She'd overplayed her hand. What she thought was clarification was starting to sound like dismissal. I stayed still. Not because I was frozen, but because I knew suddenly that I didn't need to move. The air felt charged, expectant. A chair scraped softly against the floor near the front. Someone stood. It wasn't me. And in one sentence, everything changed. There was no applause, no murmurs, no clinking of glasses or awkward attempts at conversation to fill the silence. Just stillness, thick, electric. Every head turned from Naomi toward the man now stepping away from the VIP table, buttoning his jacket slowly as he approached the stage. His name was Lawrence Carter, founder, majority shareholder, and to most in that room, the untouchable power behind everything. Naomi had worked under him for the last 11 years, but until this moment, she'd never looked smaller next to him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush, just took the microphone she had only moments ago used to smooth over my existence. He cleared his throat softly, then said, "I believe we need a moment of clarity." That was all. Just that line. The room held its breath. Naomi gave a polite smile, still clinging to the professionalism she'd wrapped herself in all night. She stepped back, just enough to signal deference, but not enough to let go of control. Lawrence glanced in my direction, not performative, just acknowledging. Then, with a calmness that made every word ring truer, he continued. "For those unfamiliar with tonight's structure," he began, "this gala was conceived and financed by one of our quietest but most influential partners. The person who, despite his preference for staying out of the spotlight, has been instrumental in structuring this firm's values, ethics policy, and long-term charitable arm." He paused, not to build drama, but to allow comprehension to catch up. Then, plainly, "You know him as Naomi's husband. I know him as one of our lead strategic partners. The man whose ideas shaped the very proposal this event celebrates tonight." My feet didn't move. My hands didn't twitch. I simply existed in that moment, exposed but no longer invisible. No flourish, no exaggeration. Just fact. He continued, "If there was confusion tonight about roles, I hope this clears it up." The line wasn't sharp. It wasn't said to punish, but it cut through the room like a razor. Glasses paused midair. A woman across the aisle slowly set hers down. The soft hum of background music that had returned without notice now died again. Someone must have turned it off, sensing something important was happening. People looked at me, really looked. Some with embarrassment, some with surprise, but none with the same passive disregard they'd held when they thought I was just helping. And Naomi, she was still standing there, just a few feet away. She didn't say anything, but I saw her hand begin to tremble, not dramatically, not enough for most to notice, but I noticed. She reached for her glass of champagne, her default mask of composure, her fingers wrapped around the stem, too tight. When she lifted it, her hand betrayed her. A single slip, a loss of control. The glass hit the marble floor. It didn't shatter loudly, just enough to make someone in the front row flinch. No one laughed. No one even reacted. Lawrence stepped aside without glancing back at her. He didn't need to. He'd said enough. More than I ever could have. My eyes drifted toward the tray near the service table. The same one from earlier. Still untouched. Still waiting, like a forgotten echo of a part of me I no longer needed to carry. I walked past it slowly, not looking down. My hand brushed against the napkin tucked into my pocket. I let it fall. I didn't toss it. I didn't hand it off. I just let it go behind me. The release wasn't loud. It didn't draw attention. But it mattered to me. I didn't speak to Naomi. I didn't glare. I didn't offer her a reaction she could use. Instead, I nodded once to Lawrence. Not gratitude, acknowledgement. Two men who understood that truth doesn't need volume to be real. The program resumed slowly, like a train finding its tracks again. Conversations restarted, but this time they were hushed, redirected. I wasn't the punchline anymore. I wasn't even the mystery. I was just there, whole. People looked at me differently, but not because of what they'd learned about my title or stake. They looked because I hadn't flinched. But that wasn't the victory. The real shift had happened quietly, before any words were spoken. What broke that night wasn't just a glass. It was a version of us. The truth had done its work. Now we had to live with it. The ballroom didn't empty in a rush. People lingered. Some out of obligation, others out of disbelief. No one quite sure how to behave after watching a story unravel in front of them. Several guests came up to me with smiles that were a little too apologetic. A few handshakes firmer than usual, and words that meant well but didn't land. You handled that with grace. Wish more people had your kind of patience. You know, it's always the quiet ones. I nodded, politely, briefly, not out of coldness, but because it wasn't theirs to fix. It hadn't been a triumph. I hadn't won anything. I'd simply stopped participating in the lie. Eventually, the room thinned. I stood alone near one of the tall windows, looking out onto the street where valet drivers rushed between high-end cars and short tempers. My coat was already over my arm. I didn't need anything else from that space. As I stepped outside, the cold hit instantly, sharper than I'd expected for early spring. The air was honest. It didn't pretend to be warm. I welcomed it. The sounds from inside faded behind me. Laughs, music, muffled speeches that no longer applied. I was halfway to the curb when I heard her heels. Slow. Hesitant. Not like Naomi at all. She walked up beside me, arms folded tightly against the chill, though I knew it wasn't just the wind she was shielding herself from. Neither of us spoke right away. She glanced at me once, then looked away. I didn't mean for it to go like that, she said, voice low. You know that, right? I waited a moment before answering. You meant what you said, I replied. You just didn't expect it to be heard the way it was. She shifted her weight, looked down at the sidewalk. People misunderstood. I didn't bite. She kept going. I was trying to keep things from getting messy in front of everyone. It wasn't about you. It was about the company, the image. I know, I interrupted gently. It's always about the image. The silence between us wasn't angry. It was tired. I wasn't trying to humiliate you, she added, quieter this time. I didn't think. No, you didn't, I said, looking straight ahead. And that's the part that matters. She stopped walking. I didn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list grievances or demand apologies. That wasn't what I needed anymore. I turned to face her, calm and clear. What you did was a choice. That's it. And choices, they come with weight. She opened her mouth, maybe to defend herself again, but closed it just as quickly. Maybe for once she felt the edge of her own decisions. I didn't need to win. I just needed the line between us to be real. The car pulled up. The valet handed me the keys. I nodded in thanks and slid into the driver's seat. Naomi didn't follow. The ride home was quiet, Streetlights casting gold across the windshield. The radio left off. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my mind drifted. Back to dinners where I'd swallowed comments, holidays spent being agreeable, years of being helpful instead of heard. I had spent so much of my life being silent, thinking that made me easy to love, but all it did was make me easy to overlook. I pulled into the driveway. Our house looked the same, but something in me had shifted so completely, it felt unfamiliar. Inside, I hung my coat, loosened my tie, and walked into the kitchen. I reached for a napkin, one of the same folded cloth ones Naomi always insisted we use when guests came over. I unfolded it, smoothed it onto the table, and left it there. I wasn't disappearing anymore. Not in this house. Not anywhere. I thought about what respect really meant. It wasn't the applause back at the ballroom. It wasn't Lawrence's introduction or the nods from guests. Respect was simpler than that. It was how someone spoke your name when you weren't in the room, when they didn't need something from you, when there was nothing left to gain. That night didn't end with resolution. It ended with truth. I didn't promise Naomi anything, not reconciliation, not distance. I just promised myself that I would never again shrink to make someone else comfortable. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background as I poured a glass of water and leaned on the counter. There was peace, not perfect, but honest. Some people learn who you are when you speak. Others learn when you finally don't have to.